I guess the last question I have for you on this very specific topic before I get into a whole bunch of other things that we're going to talk about, is the overlap and or detraction between powerlifting and bodybuilding. So you've competed at such a high level in these two sports that have a very clear overlap, but also have a pretty different point of optimization. I mean, bodybuilding is a very subjective sport where it's about how you look. And at the end of the day, nobody cares how strong you are when you're standing on that stage. Conversely, powerlifting, which of course requires a lot of strength, nobody really cares how you look. So both of those athletes pay unbelievable attention to how much weight they lift, but they're serving a very different purpose. You're one of the people who has excelled at both. I've met people who are excellent at one or the other, more on the power side, I should say, than the bodybuilding side. So I'm curious as to what some of the trade-offs are that you have to make, and and sort of a hypothetical, Layne, what would be the closest length of time you could have between the two if you wanted to be at your best in each?
Great question. So I think the overlap is that the obvious one is that to look muscular, you have to have a lot of muscle. And contractile tissue is what's needed to move weight, right? So there is a little bit of debate about this, but the consensus is that hypertrophy does matter for strength training. So the more muscle you have, the more weight you're going to be able to lift. I think that the trade-off is that bodybuilding is a much more forgiving sport insofar as you can skin the cat 1,000 different ways. If you don't want to squat, you can hack squat. If you don't want to hack squat, you can split squat. It is simply about creating tension on that muscle, getting the requisite volume in, and progressive overload. Now, people hear progressive overload and they think weight, but progressive overload takes many forms, and the major one of which is volume, in particular volume load, which is basically, for all intents and purposes, number of hard sets, number of sets that approach failure. So you can do that many different ways. If you're hurting on a certain exercise, hey, change it up, try something different, find something that you can do without pain, or find something that you really enjoy, right? There's a lot of different ways to skin a cat. When it comes to powerlifting, you can do some accessory movements and whatnot, but you still have to do the major lifts. You still have to be very well trained at the major lifts. Otherwise, you're not going to perform your best on meet day. And so I think that bodybuilding in a way is a little bit more demanding mentally, because the hunger, if people out there listening, if you've never been insanely shredded, you cannot imagine the levels of hunger and low energy that these people go through and that I have been through. I'm talking about so hungry that you literally think about it from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, and then it wakes you up at night. I'm talking about such low energy that I can remember one time I had finished my training session. I was probably a few weeks out from a show. I was sitting on my couch and the remote control was probably 5 feet away from me. And there was a terrible show on that I did not want to watch. And I watched the entire thing because I did not feel like getting up to get the remote. And that kind of serves into metabolic adaptation and reductions in non-exercise activity thermogenesis.
And just give people a sense, Layne, of how many calories a day you might be ingesting during that period of your training cycle and for how long that would last.
Yeah, so my last show I did, I competed as a pro natural bodybuilder in 2010, so it's been a while. And I won the IFPA International, the heavyweight division, and then I ended up doing the IFPA World Championships and placed top 5 in the heavyweight division. And it's difficult because it's the amount of calories you start on is not going to be what you end up finishing on. I think the lowest my calories got was just around 1900. Now, that may not sound that bad, but keep in mind, we're talking about somebody who is, probably over 185 pounds of lean body mass, quite a bit of lean body mass.
And training how many hours per day?
2 hours a day, minimum. So, that was pretty much all I had energy for. I'd go in the gym and train for 2 hours, and that would be all she wrote, and I'd muster up. I can remember going in and doing a cardio session one night. I got on the elliptical, I started going, and the only way I can describe this is it felt soul sucking. And I went for what I felt like must have been 40 minutes. And I looked down at the clock and it said 3 minutes. And I just remember thinking, how can I do this? So tired that or even I would stand up and I would get lightheaded because my blood pressure was so low. So I think bodybuilding is very difficult in that doesn't leave you, right? Powerlifting is difficult in that it beats your body up. But once you're done at the gym, other than your rehab work and some other stuff, you can kind of leave it at the gym, So they're really difficult sports, but for slightly different reasons. Again, bodybuilding is more forgiving in that it doesn't really matter what exercises you do as long as you get in enough, right? And you can kind of skin that cat multiple different ways. We've seen bodybuilders be successful through every different methodology. Dorian Yates never squatted. He talked about it. He only did leg press, right? Leg press and leg extensions. Whereas Ronnie Coleman, squatted, tons of weight. So I think that the appeal for me for bodybuilding was that mental challenge, basically how much could you suffer? And then the appeal in powerlifting was, this is not subjective. It is a little bit subjective because you can argue squat depth is subjective. You can argue that deadlift lockouts are subjective.
Right, but far, far less subjective.
Far less subjective. And I've had that, the order of the competition is you get 3 attempts on each lift, and it goes squat, bench press, deadlift. And it's progressive, meaning if you pick a weight and you miss it, you can't go down. So you can only go up. But I've been in those big meets where it comes down to the very last deadlift, and it's either you pull it or you don't, and that determines if you win or not. I've had that experience. It's unbelievable. And so to me, I probably preferred that only because I'm doing what I trained to do, right? In bodybuilding, I'm doing something different than I trained to do. What I needed to do to get to that bodybuilding stage is way different than what I'm going to do on stage. Whereas powerlifting, I'm just doing what I've done, right?
Yep.
This is just a showcase. So now to your question, how far apart could you do well in them?
And let me add one more question, which is, what order would you pick? You get to pick the order of which you do the 2 contests and what the minimum space is to optimize both.
So that's going to be so individually dependent, right? Because, for me, at my weight class in powerlifting, 93 kilograms or 205 pounds, I'm pretty lean at that body weight. So what I would say is that I would probably, if I was going to do this, I would do a meet. I maintain this body weight with some level of effort, but mostly pretty easily. I would do the meet, and then I would start prepping for a show.
And how much longer would you need after that meet? How long would it take for you to be stage ready?
It depends on how hard I wanted to push it and what level. If I was wanting to really maximize lean body mass retention, I'd probably want 6 months, I would say.